The dust motes dancing in the singular shaft of afternoon sunlight looked like tiny galaxies swirling in the dead silence of the study, oblivious to the fact that the world as I knew it was about to shatter into irreparable shards. Before we descend into the darkness of this basement and the secrets it held, I want to take a brief moment to thank those of you who have subscribed and liked our content. For your support might seem simple to you, but it makes us very happy and keeps us going. Plus, please tell us what would you do if you were in this situation. Write it down, as replying to your comments makes us happy. My name is Elias, and 3 days ago I was burying my father, a man the local newspapers described as a pillar of the community, a dedicated surgeon, and a loving single parent who had raised his only son with a gentle hand after the tragic death of my mother. Today, I am standing in the center of his private sanctuary, holding a brass key that I found taped to the underside of his bedside drawer, a key that does not fit any visible lock in the entire house. The house itself is a sprawling Victorian estate on the edge of town, the kind of place that smells of lemon polish and old paper, a place that always felt safe, insulated from the chaos of the outside world. My father, Dr. Arthur Blackwood, was a man of precise habits. He woke up at 6 in the morning, drank black coffee, read the medical journals, and spent his evenings here in this study, listening to classical music and working on what he called his memoirs. When the heart attack took him at 65, it was swift and merciful, leaving me with a substantial inheritance, a house full of memories, and a profound sense of loneliness. I had come to the study to pack away his books, to donate his medical texts to the university library, and perhaps to read those memoirs he had been so secretive about. I wanted to feel close to him one last time, to hear his voice through his writing. I walked over to his massive oak desk, a piece of furniture that dominated the room like a judge's bench. The leather surface was worn smooth by his hands. I sat in his chair, which still smelled faintly of his sandalwood cologne and the antiseptic scent of the hospital that seemed to cling to his skin even years after he had reduced his hours. I tried the key in the top drawer. It did not fit. I tried the side drawers. Nothing. I looked around the room, scanning the bookshelves, the display cabinets filled with antique medical instruments, the heavy velvet curtains. It had to open something. My father was not a man who kept useless things. I spent the next hour systematically testing the key on every lockable surface in the room. The file cabinet, the display case, even the window latches. Nothing worked. Frustration began to mix with my grief. Maybe it was just a key to an old locker at the hospital, or a safety deposit box I had not found the paperwork for yet. I sat back down at the desk, running my hands along the carved wood of the knee-hole. My fingers brushed against something uneven on the inner panel, right where his left knee would have rested. It felt like a small indentation, a knot in the wood that had been pushed in. I crouched down, using the flashlight on my phone to inspect it. It was not a knot. It was a small, circular keyhole, artfully concealed within the decorative rosette carved into the dark oak. My heart gave a strange, unexpected flutter. A secret compartment. It seemed so out of character for him, so dramatic for a man who prided himself on transparency and logic. I inserted the brass key. It slid in with a satisfying, well-oiled click. I turned it, and a hidden drawer, distinct from the main stack, popped open with a soft hiss of air, as if it had been holding its breath for decades. Inside the drawer, there were no memoirs. There were no journals filled with the wisdom of a seasoned doctor. Instead, there was a single, heavy wooden box made of dark mahogany, and a stack of what looked like driver's licenses bound together with a rubber band. I reached for the licenses first. The rubber band was brittle and snapped as soon as I touched it, scattering the plastic cards across the desktop. I picked one up. It belonged to a woman named Sarah Miller. Her date of birth indicated she would have been 22 years old. The photo showed a smiling girl with blonde bangs and bright blue eyes. I frowned. I did not know a Sarah Miller. I picked up the next one. James Corbett, 19 years old, a student ID from the local community college. The next was a library card for a woman named Elena Vance. As I looked at the faces, a cold prickle of recognition began to crawl up the back of my neck, not because I knew them personally, but because I had seen them before. I grew up in this town. I knew its history. I knew its ghosts. And the face of Sarah Miller was one of the most famous ghosts we had. She had disappeared 15 years ago. Her body was found 3 weeks later in the marshlands, carefully posed, her hands folded over her chest. The case had never been solved. She was the first victim of the so-called marshland hunter, a serial killer who had terrorized our state for a decade before seemingly vanishing into thin air 5 years ago. My hands began to tremble. Why did my father have the driver's license of a murder victim? Perhaps he had treated her? He was an emergency room surgeon for years. Maybe these were patients he had lost, people he could not save, and he kept their IDs as some sort of morbid memento of his failures? That was the only logical explanation. My father was a savior, a healer. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who bandaged my scraped knees, who sat by my bed when I had the flu. He could not be connected to this in any other way. I tried to cling to that rationalization, but the wooden box sat there, accusing and heavy. I opened the lid. The smell that wafted out was not sandalwood or antiseptic. It was metallic and stale. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, were jewelry pieces. A silver locket, a class ring, a pair of pearl earrings, and beneath them, a stack of Polaroids. I hesitated. A part of me, the part that was still a loving son, screamed at me to close the box, to burn it, to never look at what was inside. But the truth is a parasite. Once it burrows in, it demands to be fed. I picked up the first photo. It was not a medical photo. It was not a picture of a patient in a hospital bed. It was Sarah Miller. She was terrified, her eyes wide, bound to a chair in a room with concrete walls. The background was blurry, but I could make out a workbench and a distinctive red vice grip. I dropped the photo as if it were burning coal. I gagged, stumbling back from the desk until my back hit the bookshelves. I looked around the study, my sanctuary, and suddenly the walls felt like they were closing in. That red vice grip. I knew that vice grip. It was in our basement. It had been there for as long as I could remember. My father used it to fix toasters and repair my toys. I had stood next to that workbench 1,000 times, watching him work, handing him screwdrivers, listening to him hum along to the radio while he tinkered. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The concrete walls in the photo were the walls of our basement. The room where I played video games, the room where we stored the Christmas decorations, was the room where Sarah Miller had spent her last terrifying moments. I scrambled back to the desk, driven by a horrified, frantic energy. I needed to be wrong. I needed to prove myself wrong. I shuffled through the rest of the photos. James Corbett, Elena Vance, 4 others I did not recognize immediately but whose fear was captured in high definition. On the back of each photo, in my father's distinct, elegant cursive handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed my report cards and birthday checks, were dates and times. Sarah, October 14, 2001, 11 p.m. James, February 3, 2003, 9 a.m. The dates corresponded perfectly with the police reports I had read about in the news over the years. The marshland hunter was not some drifter. He was not a monster hiding in the shadows. He was the man who made me pancakes on Sunday mornings. He was the man who was currently being eulogized on social media as a saint. The room began to spin. I felt bile rise in my throat. I ran to the adjoining bathroom and emptied my stomach. When I washed my face, the eyes staring back at me in the mirror looked different. They were his eyes. I had his jawline. I had his hands. Did I have his darkness too? Was it genetic? A dormant virus waiting to wake up? I gripped the porcelain sink until my knuckles turned white. I had to call the police. That was the right thing to do. The moral thing. But my hand hovered over the phone in my pocket. If I called them, everything would be over. My life, my name, my memories. I would become the son of the monster. The press would camp on the lawn. They would dig up the garden. They would dissect every moment of my childhood, looking for signs I should have seen. And what about the signs? I forced myself to think back. Were there signs? There were the late nights at the hospital, the emergency surgeries that he was called in for at odd hours. The times he came home smelling of bleach and earth, claiming the plumbing at the clinic had burst again. I had believed every word. Why wouldn't I? He was my hero. I remembered a camping trip when I was 12. We had gone up to the cabin by the lake. He told me he was going to chop wood and that I should stay in the tent and read. He was gone for 4 hours. When he came back, he had showered in the lake. His clothes were different, and he seemed exhilarated, happier than I had seen him in months. That was the summer of 2005. I looked back at the pile of licenses. There was one for a hitchhiker named Mark. The date on the back of his photo was July 2005. The same weekend we were at the cabin. While I was reading comic books in a tent, my father was hunting a human being less than 5 miles away. I walked back to the desk, my legs feeling like lead. I needed to know more. I needed to know everything before I made the call. I dug deeper into the hidden drawer. Under the photos, there was a small leather-bound notebook. I opened it. It was a log, not of medical procedures, but of the hunts. He detailed the stalking process with clinical detachment. He described how he chose them. Subject shows lack of situational awareness, he wrote about Sarah. Subject is arrogant, believes he is invincible, he wrote about James. It was chillingly analytical. There was no rage in the writing, no passion. It was just a problem to be solved, a procedure to be executed. He wrote about the disposal methods, the way he cleaned the scenes to avoid leaving DNA. He even critiqued his own performance, noting where he could have been more efficient. Then I turned the page and my blood froze solid in my veins. The entry was dated 2 weeks ago, 3 days before he died. Subject identified. Proximity is ideal. Trust is established. The final challenge. Beneath it, he had written a name. Elias. My name. He had written my name. I stared at the word, the letters swimming before my eyes. He was planning to kill me. His own son. The final challenge. Why? Was I getting too old? Was he afraid I would find out? Or was it just the ultimate thrill for a psychopath to destroy the one thing he had created? I read on. The subject suspects nothing. His attachment to the parent figure is a weakness to be exploited. Disposal will be difficult due to social connections, but a hiking accident is plausible. I dropped the notebook. I felt sick, betrayed, and terrified all at once. The man I had mourned for 3 days, the man whose grave I had wept over, had been plotting my murder. The heart attack that killed him had saved my life. I looked at the heavy bronze lamp on the desk. I looked at the letter opener. The room suddenly felt like a trap. I was alone in the house of a predator. Even though he was dead, his presence was suffocating. I felt like he was watching me from the shadows, judging my reaction, disappointed that he did not get to finish his masterpiece. I started to pace the room. I had to destroy this. No, I had to turn it in. No, I had to run. My thoughts were colliding, making it impossible to think straight. I grabbed the box of photos and the notebook. I could not leave them here. I had to take them to a safe place. I shoved them into my backpack. I was about to leave the room when I heard a sound. It was the front doorbell. It rang through the silent house like a gunshot. I froze. Who would be coming here now? I had told everyone I needed privacy. I crept to the window and peered through the heavy curtains. There was a police cruiser in the driveway. 2 officers were standing on the porch. Sheriff Distinct. He was my father's golf partner. They had known each other for 20 years. Did they know? Did they find something? Or were they just here to check on the grieving son? Panic seized me. If they came in and saw the hidden drawer open, saw the licenses on the desk. I scrambled back to the desk, sweeping the driver's licenses into my bag with shaking hands. I slammed the hidden drawer shut, twisting the key and pulling it out. I shoved the key into my pocket. I looked around wildly. The room looked mostly normal, except for the displaced dust and my own frantic energy. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my heart rate. I had to go down there. I had to open the door. I walked down the grand staircase, every step feeling like a descent into a new circle of hell. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Coming, I shouted, my voice cracking. I cleared my throat. I was Elias Blackwood, son of the respected doctor. I was grieving. That was the role. I opened the heavy oak door. Sheriff Brody stood there, his hat in his hands, a look of sympathy on his weathered face. Next to him was a younger deputy I did not recognize. Elias, son, the sheriff said, his voice a low rumble. I am sorry to disturb you. I know you wanted some time alone. It is okay, Sheriff, I said, forcing a weak smile. What can I do for you? Well, he shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. It is a bit of a formality, really. But we had a call. Someone reported seeing lights on in the basement late last night. And given the empty state of the house, we just wanted to make sure everything was secure. You know, with your dad gone, people get curious. The basement, the room with the vice grip, the room where Sarah Miller died. I had not been in the basement last night. I had been asleep, or had I? My mind was playing tricks on me. I was down there looking for some old boxes, I lied. The lie came easily, terrifyingly so. Was lying another trait I inherited? Right, the sheriff nodded. Well, while we are here, Elias, there is something else. The coroner called. They found something unusual during your father's autopsy. Something in his system. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? It looks like he did not die of a natural heart attack, Elias. The sheriff's eyes hardened slightly, losing some of that warmth. It looks like he was poisoned. And since you were the only one in the house with him that night. The world tilted on its axis. Poisoned? I did not poison him. I loved him. But the sheriff was looking at me, and for the first time, I did not see a family friend. I saw a cop looking at a suspect. And I had a backpack full of serial killer trophies upstairs. If they searched the house, if they found the basement, not only would they find out who my father was, they would think I was his accomplice. Or worse, that I had killed him to take his place. Can we come in, Elias? The sheriff asked. It was phrased as a question, but we both knew it was an order. I stepped back, opening the door wider. Of course, I said. As they stepped into the foyer, the weight of the backpack on my shoulder felt like it contained the souls of 20 dead people. I was trapped. My father was a monster. He had planned to kill me. Someone else had killed him, and now I was being framed for it. Or maybe, just maybe, I had done it and suppressed the memory. The notebook said, "Trust is established." Maybe my subconscious had fought back? No, that was impossible. I was sane. I was innocent. But as the sheriff walked towards the hallway that led to the study, I realized that innocence might not matter anymore. The nightmare had just begun, and the ghost of Arthur Blackwood was laughing from the grave. I squeezed the brass key in my pocket so hard it cut into my palm. I had to survive this. I had to find out who really killed him, and I had to hide the truth about the marshland hunter. Because if the world found out, I would never be free. I watched the sheriff's hand rest on his gun belt. Mind if we start in the study? The sheriff asked. That is where he died, is not it? Yes, I whispered. That is where he died. And that is where his secrets were waiting to be spilled. I followed them up the stairs, my mind racing, formulating a plan that was as desperate as it was dangerous. I was about to play a game of cat and mouse with the law, armed only with the knowledge that my father was the greatest predator this town had ever seen, and that his blood ran in my veins. Maybe, just maybe, that blood would be useful after all. The air in the hallway felt thick enough to choke on as I followed Sheriff Brody and his deputy up the carpeted stairs, the heavy oak treads groaning softly under our combined weight. My backpack, filled with the undeniable proof of my father's monstrous double life, dug into my shoulder like a physical manifestation of guilt. I tried to regulate my breathing, forcing air in through my nose and out through my mouth, counting the seconds to keep my heart from hammering its way out of my chest. 1, 2, 3. Calm down. You are Elias Blackwood. You are a grieving son. You are not a killer, and you certainly did not poison the man who raised you, even if he was secretly planning to end your life. The duality of my reality was dizzying. Minutes ago I was the hunter of secrets, and now I was the hunted. A suspect in a murder I did not commit, standing in the home of a serial killer who had been eulogized as a saint. We reached the landing, and the door to the study stood open, just as I had left it. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer, more melancholic shadows across the Persian rug and the heavy velvet drapes. The room, usually a sanctuary of intellectual quiet, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Sheriff Brody walked in first, his heavy boots making a dull thudding sound that seemed sacrilegious in this space. He looked around with a slow, calculating gaze, taking in the walls of books, the antique medical instruments, and the massive desk where I had just unearthed the horror of the marshland hunter. The deputy, a young man named Miller whose uniform looked a size too large for him, lingered by the door, his hand resting casually near his holster. It was a subtle intimidation tactic, or perhaps just a nervous habit, but it made the hair on my arms stand up. Sheriff Brody walked over to the desk. My heart seized. The hidden drawer was closed, but the ghost of what lay inside seemed to vibrate through the wood. He ran a rough hand along the edge of the desk, his fingers brushing perilously close to the decorative rosette that concealed the keyhole. I had to suppress a gasp. If he found that button, if he opened that drawer and saw the empty space where the box had been, or worse, if he asked me to empty my backpack, my life was over. I would spend the rest of my days in a cage, branded as the son who followed in his father's bloody footsteps. You said you were looking for boxes, Brody said, turning to face me. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools under the brim of his hat. Find anything interesting? Just old tax returns and medical journals, I lied, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. Nothing worth keeping. I was actually just about to pack it all up when you rang. Is that so? Brody murmured. He picked up the heavy brass letter opener, testing its weight in his hand. It was the same letter opener I had looked at earlier, wondering if I could use it to defend myself. You know, Elias, poison is a coward's weapon. It is quiet, sneaky, not like a gun or a knife. It takes a certain kind of cold, calculated mind to use it. A medical mind, usually. I did not kill my father, I said, my voice gaining a fraction more strength. I loved him. He was everything to me. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin, son, Brody said, placing the letter opener back on the desk with a sharp clatter. We found high levels of digoxin in his blood. Digitalis. It causes the heart to beat irregularly and then stop. Looks exactly like a heart attack to the untrained eye. Your father had a prescription for it, did not he? For his arrhythmia? He did, I admitted. He took it every morning. He was careful with his dosage. Maybe he made a mistake, the deputy piped up from the doorway. Arthur Blackwood did not make mistakes, Brody said, shaking his head slowly. Not with medicine. He was the most precise man I ever knew. If there was too much digoxin in his system, someone put it there. And unless he had a ghost living with him, you were the only one here. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I gripped the strap of my backpack tighter. I needed to get them out of this room. I needed to get them away from the desk. I understand how it looks, Sheriff, I said, trying to channel my father's calm, authoritative demeanor. But I have no motive. I am his only heir. I was already living here. I had nothing to gain by his death and everything to lose. Inheritance is a powerful motivator, Elias, Brody said. Maybe you got tired of waiting. Or maybe you found out something you were not supposed to. His words hit me like a physical blow. Did he know? Was he fishing? I looked at his face, searching for a sign of recognition, a hint that he knew about the basement, about the girls, about the monster Arthur Blackwood really was. But his face was a mask of professional suspicion. He did not know. He was just a cop doing his job, following the evidence. And the evidence pointed to me. I think I need to call a lawyer, I said quietly. That is your right, Brody nodded. But right now, we are just talking. We are not arresting you, Elias. Not yet, but we do need to look around. We have a warrant to search the premises for the source of the poison. Bottles, vials, anything that might have been tampered with. A warrant. They could tear the house apart. Go ahead, I said, because refusing would only make me look guiltier. Search whatever you want. I have nothing to hide. Good, Brody said. Miller, you take the upstairs. Check the bathrooms, the medicine cabinets. I will check the kitchen and the basement. The basement. Panic flared in my gut, hot and acidic. He could not go to the basement. The vice grip, the concrete walls. Even if the room was clean, even if my father had scrubbed it 1,000 times, there was an energy down there, a darkness that a seasoned cop like Brody might sense. And if he found the hidden room? Wait, was there a hidden room? The photos showed concrete walls, but our basement was finished. It had drywall and carpet. I realized then, with a jolt of horror, that the room in the photos might be behind the walls. A false wall. My father was a carpenter as well as a surgeon. He had built the bookshelves in this study. He had remodeled the kitchen. Creating a hidden chamber in the basement would have been child's play for him. If Brody started tapping on walls, if he found a hollow space, I will go with you, I said, stepping forward. To the basement. Brody looked at me, his eyebrows raised. Nervous about something, Elias? No, I said quickly. The fuse box is down there. The lights have been flickering. I do not want you to trip. It was a weak excuse, but Brody just shrugged. Lead the way. We walked out of the study, leaving the deputy to rummage through my father's bathroom. I felt a pang of anxiety leaving the room where I had found the truth, but I had the backpack. The notebook and the photos were with me. That was what mattered. As we descended the main staircase, the house felt alien to me. The family portraits on the wall, pictures of me and my father fishing, graduating, smiling, all seemed like lies now. Propaganda created by a psychopath to blend in. We reached the kitchen, and Brody spent a few minutes opening cupboards, smelling spice jars, checking the garbage disposal. He was thorough, methodical. He opened the refrigerator and looked at the milk, the orange juice, the leftovers. He drank coffee, right? Brody asked, pointing to the expensive espresso machine on the counter. Black, I said. Every morning. And you made it for him? Sometimes. Sometimes he made it himself. The morning he died, he made it. I was still asleep. Brody hummed, making a note in his small pocketbook. Convenient. He turned towards the door that led to the basement. All right, let's check down here. I opened the door and flipped the switch. The fluorescent lights below flickered to life with a low, electrical hum. We walked down the wooden steps. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and laundry detergent. This was the room where I had played video games, where I had watched movies with friends. It looked so normal. A plush beige sectional sofa, a large television, a pool table in the corner. But beyond the recreational area was the utility section. The workbench. Brody walked past the pool table, his boots scuffing on the concrete floor where the carpet ended. He walked straight to the workbench. My stomach churned. There it was, the red vice grip. It was bolted to the corner of the heavy wooden table, its jaws slightly open, as if waiting for something. Or someone. I stared at it, the image of Sarah Miller's terrified face superimposing itself over reality. I could see her bound to a chair, that red metal clamp in the background. I felt bile rise in my throat again. How many times had I stood here? How many times had I unknowingly stood on the grave of someone's daughter? Brody stopped in front of the workbench. He ran a finger over the metal of the vice grip. Your dad was handy, Brody said. I remember he fixed my lawnmower once. Nice set of tools. Yeah, I managed to choke out. He liked to fix things. Fix things, Brody repeated. He looked around the unfinished part of the basement. The walls here were concrete blocks, painted white. He tapped his knuckles against the wall. Solid. He walked a few feet and tapped again. Solid. He was looking for something. He knew something. You know, Elias, Brody said, his back to me. We had a tip about the marshland hunter a few years back. Some hiker claimed he saw a man dragging a large bag near the old creek bed. We never found anything. But the profile. The FBI profilers said the guy was likely a local. Someone respected. Someone who could move around without suspicion. A doctor, maybe. Or a cop. He turned to face me, his eyes hard. Did your father ever go out late at night, Elias? Did he ever come home with mud on his boots? My mouth went dry. He suspected. He did not just suspect me of poisoning him. He suspected my father of being the monster. And if he suspected that, then he thought I was covering it up. Or participating. My father was a surgeon, I said, my voice trembling. He saved lives. He did not take them. Doctors have a God complex sometimes, Brody said softly. They decide who lives and who dies every day. Sometimes the power goes to their head. He looked down at the floor. There was a drain in the center of the concrete, near the water heater. He squatted down, shining his flashlight into the dark abyss of the drain. Bleach, Brody sniffed. Smells like bleach. Strong. The cleaning lady was here on Tuesday, I said. She cleans the basement floor. With industrial strength bleach? Brody stood up, dusting off his knees. Seems excessive for a basement that nobody really uses. He walked over to a section of the wall behind the water heater. There was a large wooden shelf unit there, filled with paint cans and old jars of screws. Brody grabbed the side of the shelf. This is not bolted to the wall, he observed. I do not know, I stammered. Brody pulled on the shelf. It was heavy, but it moved. It swung outward on hidden hinges I had never noticed in 20 years of living here. My breath caught in my throat. Behind the shelves was a door. A heavy, steel door painted to match the concrete wall. Brody looked at me, his expression grim. You did not know about this? No, I whispered, and it was the truth. I had never seen this door. Stay back, Brody commanded, his hand moving to his gun. He tried the handle. Locked. He looked at me. Do you have a key for this? The key in my pocket. The brass key from the study. I had assumed it was for the drawer, but the drawer had opened. Wait, I had used the key on the drawer, but maybe. No, the drawer key was small. This looked like a heavy deadbolt. I do not have a key, I said. Brody stepped back and kicked the door near the lock. It was solid steel. It did not budge. Miller, he shouted up the stairs. Bring the ram. I stood there, frozen. They were going to open it. They were going to find the killing room. And I was standing there with a backpack full of trophies. If they opened that room and found bodies, or blood, or tools of torture, and then searched me, I had to get rid of the bag. Now, Sheriff, I am going to be sick, I said, clutching my stomach. It wasn't entirely a lie. Brody glanced at me, distracted. Go use the laundry sink. Don't leave the basement. I need a bathroom, I pleaded. Please. Brody hesitated, then nodded. Upstairs. Kitchen bath. Leave the door open. Miller is up there. I scrambled up the stairs, my legs feeling like jelly. I burst into the kitchen. Deputy Miller was coming down the hall, carrying a heavy black battering ram. He looked at me with surprise. Bathroom, I gasped, pointing to the small powder room off the kitchen. I ran inside and slammed the door, locking it. I knew I had seconds before they started pounding on it. I looked around frantically. Where could I hide the notebook and the photos? The toilet tank? No. First place they would look. The trash? Too obvious. My eyes landed on the vent near the ceiling. It was screwed shut. I didn't have a screwdriver. I looked at the window. It was small, frosted glass, leading out to the side yard. I unlatched it and pushed it open. The screen was old and rusted. I pushed hard, and the screen popped out, falling into the bushes outside. I could drop the bag out. But then what? Someone might find it, or the police might see it when they walked around the house. I heard the heavy thud of the battering ram downstairs. Once, twice. I opened the backpack. I took out the wooden box of trophies and the notebook. I looked around the small room. The vanity cabinet. It had a false bottom. I remembered because I used to hide cigarettes there when I was a teenager. I fell to my knees, opening the cabinet under the sink. I pulled out the extra rolls of toilet paper and the cleaning supplies. I felt for the loose panel at the very bottom. It was still there. I pried it up with my fingernails. There was a dark, dusty space between the cabinet floor and the actual floorboards. I shoved the wooden box and the notebook into the space, pushing them as far back as I could. I replaced the panel, pressing it down until it clicked into place. I threw the toilet paper and bottles back in, arranging them messily to cover the seams. The backpack still had the loose driver's licenses. I grabbed them. Sarah Miller, James Corbett. I shoved them into my underwear, flattening them against my skin. It was risky, but I couldn't leave them in the bag. I stood up, flushed the toilet for effect, and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. I looked terrified. Good. That fit the narrative. I unlocked the door just as Miller was coming back up the stairs, looking breathless. Sheriff got it open, Miller said, his eyes wide. He wants you down there. Now. I walked past him, my heart pounding against the stolen identities pressed against my skin. I went back down the stairs. The heavy steel door was swinging open. Inside, it was dark. Brody was standing in the doorway, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Elias, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Get over here. I walked to the threshold and looked inside. It was not a killing room. It was a hospital room. There was a surgical bed. An IV drip stand. Monitors. Cabinets filled with medical supplies. And in the corner, a small cot, but it was empty. Clean. Sterile. What is this? Brody asked, shining his light around. An unlicensed clinic? I stared, confused. Where was the concrete room from the photos? Where were the chains? Then I saw it. On the far wall, behind the surgical bed. A large, rectangular section of the wall that was a slightly different shade of white. And on the floor, faint scratch marks, as if something heavy had been dragged. My father. I started, improvising. He treated people. People who could not go to the hospital. Illegal immigrants. People without insurance. He told me he did pro bono work. I did not know he did it here. Brody looked at me, skeptical. A secret hospital in a basement behind a steel door? That is a hell of a lot of pro bono work, Elias. He walked over to the cabinets and opened one. Vials of morphine, fentanyl, high-grade anesthetics. He was running a pharmacy down here, Brody muttered. This changes things. How? I asked. It gives a lot more people a motive to kill him, Brody said. Addicts, dealers, Angry patience. If he was dealing out the back door. He turned to me. But it does not clear you, son. In fact, it might make it worse. If you knew about this, and you were fighting over the money. I did not know. I insisted. We will see, Brody said. We are going to need to process this entire room. And I am afraid I have to take you in now. Not for murder, yet. But for questioning regarding. He gestured to the room, whatever this operation is. Am I under arrest? Let's just call it assisting with the investigation, Brody said, his hand firm on my shoulder. Come on, Miller, stay here. Secure the scene. Do not let anyone in. As Brody marched me up the stairs, my mind was racing. The killing room was real. I had seen the photos. But he had disguised it. Or moved it. Or maybe this was the room, sanitized and repurposed to look like a clinic if anyone ever found it. The concrete walls in the photos must have been covered by the drywall and medical paneling. He had a cover story ready even in death. We walked out into the cool evening air. The sun had set, and the sky was a bruised purple. Brody opened the back door of his cruiser. Get in, he said. I slid onto the hard plastic seat. The safety partition separated me from the front. I felt like a criminal. As Brody walked around to the driver's side, I looked out the window. Across the street, parked under the heavy branches of an oak tree, was a black sedan. Its engine was running, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the cooling air. The windows were tinted dark, but I could see a silhouette in the driver's seat. The person was watching the house. Watching me. Brody got in and started the car. As we pulled away, I turned my head to keep the black sedan in view. It pulled out slowly, keeping a steady distance behind us. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the brass key I still had. I had hidden the box. I had the licenses, but I had missed something. I closed my eyes and tried to visualize the notebook I had glanced at in the bathroom. The last page. I had seen something written in the margin, scribbled in red ink, different from my father's neat blue cursive. Phase 2. Initiation. And below that, a phone number. I memorized the numbers as we drove through the dark streets of the town I thought I knew. I was not just fighting the police now. I was fighting Phase 2. And whoever was in that black car behind us was likely part of it. My father was dead, but his game was far from over. In fact, I had the sinking feeling that for me, the game had only just begun. I checked the rear window again. The black sedan turned left when we turned right, disappearing into the night. It didn't comfort me. It just meant they knew where I was going, and they didn't need to follow me to find me again. I was alone in the backseat of a police car, with the evidence of 20 murders pressing against my skin, and the terrifying realization that I was now the main character in a script written by a madman. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I clenched them into fists. I would not be a victim. I would not be a pawn. I was a Blackwood, and if I had to burn this whole town down to find the truth, I would. The ride to the station felt like a funeral procession for my own life. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the windows of the cruiser and distorting the neon lights of the passing strip malls into blurry, weeping ghosts. Sheriff Brody did not say a word the entire drive. His silence was heavier than any accusation. When we arrived, the station was buzzing with the low-level chaos of a Friday night. Drunks were being processed and a domestic dispute was shouting in the lobby, but the sea of uniforms parted for Brody as he led me through the secure doors. I was not put in a cell. Instead, I was ushered into an interview room, a windowless box painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. The metal table was bolted to the floor. The chair was cold. Brody left me there with a promise that he would return after speaking with the coroner again. I was alone with the hum of the ventilation system and the terrifying plastic edges of the driver's licenses digging into my skin. They were physical proof of guilt, yet they were the only leverage I had. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I stared at the mirror on the wall, knowing full well there were eyes behind it. Was it Brody, or was it someone else? The memory of the black sedan haunted me. Phase 2. Initiation. The words from the notebook burned in my mind. I needed to know who was on the other end of that number. I stood up and knocked on the door. A uniformed officer opened it, looking bored. I need to make a phone call, I said. I have the right to an attorney. The officer shrugged and pointed to a phone on the wall in the hallway. Make it quick. I picked up the receiver. My fingers trembled as I punched in the digits I had memorized. 1, then 7, then 3. I held my breath. The line rang once, twice. Then there was a click. "Identify," a voice said. It was synthetic, distorted. "This is Elias," I whispered, shielding the receiver with my hand. "Elias Blackwood." There was a pause. "Asset confirmed. The contingency is active. Do not speak to the police. Counsel is inbound." The line went dead. I stared at the receiver. Asset? Contingency? My father had prepared for this. He knew this day might come. I hung up the phone and walked back into the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was not just the son of a killer. I was part of an asset management plan. 10 minutes later, the door opened. It was not Brody. It was a man in a charcoal suit that cost more than my car. He carried a leather briefcase and had the smooth, predatory smile of a shark. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, closing the door behind him and turning off the recording equipment with a practiced flick of a switch. "My name is Silas Thorne. Your father retained my firm a long time ago for this specific scenario. We are getting you out of here." "Who are you?" I asked, backing away. "We are the people who clean up the messes," Thorne said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a document. "The sheriff found the poison in the basement. They are charging you with homicide within the hour. Unless you walk out of here with me right now." "How can I walk out?" "Because," Thorne smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen, "we have evidence that proves someone else was in the house. A drifter. We planted it 20 minutes ago. You are the victim now, Elias. Phase 2 is about survival. Welcome to the family business." The rain felt like ice against my skin as I stepped out of the police station, the heavy metal doors clanging shut behind me with a sound of finality. Sheriff Brody stood under the awning, his face a mask of frustration and impotent rage. He watched us leave, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, knowing that the law had been circumvented by money and influence. Silas Thorne opened the back door of his silver limousine, gesturing for me to enter with the mock politeness of a royal executioner. As the leather seat swallowed me, the muffled silence of the luxury vehicle cut off the noise of the storm outside. I was free, technically, but the air inside the car felt heavier than the jail cell. Thorne slid into the seat across from me as the car glided away from the curb. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and held one out to me. I hesitated, then took it. My hands were still shaking. I took a sip, the alcohol burning a path down my throat, grounding me in the surreal nightmare my life had become. Thorne smiled, a thin, lip-stretching expression that did not reach his eyes. He told me that the drifter they had found was a man named Cryptic, a homeless veteran with a history of mental illness. He explained that a vial of digitalis had been conveniently discovered in the man's coat pocket, along with a stolen watch belonging to my father. The narrative was perfect: a burglary gone wrong, a confused addict, a tragic end to a beloved doctor. It was a lie so clean it sparkled. I asked him why they would do this for me. Why go to such lengths? Thorne leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He told me that my father was not just a serial killer. He said the term was too crude, too small. My father was a facilitator. The marshland hunter was a persona, yes, but the basement, the clinic, the hunts, they were part of a service. A service provided to a very exclusive, very wealthy clientele who had dark appetites and the money to pay for discretion. My father was the procurer, the doctor, and the cleaner. He was the linchpin of an operation that spanned the entire state. My stomach churned. The hospital room in the basement made sense now. It was not just for him. It was for them, the guests, the clients. Thorne continued, his voice smooth and hypnotic. He explained that my father's death was indeed a poisoning, but it was self-administered. It was a retirement. He knew his health was failing, and in this line of work, you do not fade away in a nursing home. You exit on your own terms before you become a liability. But the contract, the legacy, had to be passed on. That was the rule. Blood for blood. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a black folder, sliding it across the leather seat toward me. He said this was phase 2. He said that I had shown promise. I had found the hidden drawer. I had kept my composure with the police. I had hidden the evidence rather than destroying it. These were the traits of a survivor, the traits of a Blackwood. I looked at the folder. I felt the sharp edges of the driver's licenses hidden in my underwear, pressing against my skin like a brand. I realized then that I was trapped. If I refused, the The protection would vanish. The drifter story would fall apart. I would be the murderer again. They owned me. I picked up the folder. It was heavy. I did not open it. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, blurring into long streaks of light. I thought about Sarah Miller. I thought about the boy named James. I thought about the monster my father was, and the monster they wanted me to become. I turned back to Thorne. I asked him what happens next. Thorne raised his glass in a toast. He said that tomorrow we would clean the basement properly. He said that on Monday, I would meet the board of directors. He said that I had a lot to learn, but I had the best teachers money could buy. I gripped the folder until my knuckles turned white. I would play their game. I would learn their secrets. I would memorize their names and their faces. I was part of the family business now. But as the car turned into the long, dark driveway of my father's estate, I made a silent vow to the ghosts that haunted the soil of this town. I would not be the procurer. I would not be the cleaner. I would be the end. I would burn the legacy to the ground, even if I had to stand in the center of the flames to do it. Thorne smiled, unaware of the fire he had just ignited. "We are home," he said. "Welcome home," I whispered.